we are in a whole lot of philosophical and theological problems, like selfless versus selfless, pride, humility, because we've had the wrong standpoint by which to think of the questions. So for me, what I mean is I think basically creativity is central. Therefore, the epistemological standpoint by which to ask all questions should be from what I would call the phenomenology of the artist. Because if you ask it from the phenomenology of the guy sitting at their desk, they're going to talk about selfish versus selfless. Binary thinking is what happens when you do your work from a desk. But in art, like was on the artist has the lived, vivid experience of how it's not a binary choice between excellence or a lack of excellence, selfless versus selfish. That actually in the creative act itself, you get more of the logic that I think is temporal, fuller, more embodied, more holistic, where you actually see that the choice to say, well, I'm not going to be excellent because I don't want to be prideful. Oh, but if you're not in a sense prideful on the beautiful, then that's a sin, right? There's a certain like lack of like pride in, Jesus, in the creative act that actually becomes a sin. But how do you make sense of that? Right? Because that doesn't say, well, wait a minute, I thought pride was bad. You can make sense of it in the standpoint of the phenomenology of the artist. You can make sense of it in that. But you see, the problem is, let's say you try to make sense of it from the standpoint of the economy. Well, your experience of work is one person is the CEO, other people are below them. You have more of an experience of a ladder, right? So it's harder to make sense of it. Now, I'm not saying that, that's necessarily bad in all circumstances, but the problem is your standpoint is more limited by which to think of these issues. But when you think of it from the place of the creative act or a conversation that's fuller, you say, no, actually that girl being excellent has like a sainthood to it. Oh, and you also see, and I think you're pointing to this, Sherry, that actually to shine, which is to me such a critical idea, you have to risk being accused of pride. You actually can't overcome pride unless you can be seen as prideful. Like, wasn't Jesus seen as prideful? Wasn't he seen as self-centered? Like, and in some respects,
wasn't he the guy saying, who do you say that I am?
Yeah, right.
I said, Christ, he said, right.
And that's right. And so actually, like, in my opinion, the only way to truly glorify God necessarily has to appear in circumstances where you can be accused of not glorifying God, right? And so what can happen is people can moralize avoiding excellence as being holy precisely to avoid the tension of being mislabeled, right? And that actually is then pride. That actually is bad pride, right? That's versus the good pride. But you see, all of this, and I'll stop, but all of this is hard to make sense of if you're not thinking of it from the midst of the creative act, in the middle of the making of art, in the middle of creativity, which if we have a culture where people aren't playing music after dinner and they're not going into live music, then they don't have that experience to bring these seemingly contradictory tensions together into a harmony. And so the lack of the experience of art in that sense makes us incapable of even rightly approaching these issues that then if we can't rightly approach, we do in the back of our mind say, well, I shouldn't pursue excellence in the arts because that would be self-centered. I shouldn't do that. And then people don't. And they don't even realize the error of thinking that way because they haven't had these experiences of the arts to show that it's not an either or in that way. So the costs are high.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. I gotta go. I gotta tell my wife I'm quitting my job. So thanks, Daniel.
It was great to meet you, Sam. It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure.